The peaceful dawn, the garden. World Captain. Elena Vasquez stepped off the transport shuttle onto the landing pad of New Horizon Colony, breathing in the sweet scent of blooming fruit trees that lined the settlement's main avenue. The morning air carried the sounds of children laughing as they played between the gardens, their voices mixing with the gentle hum of agricultural drones tending to vast fields of golden wheat that stretched toward the distant mountains. New Horizon represented everything humanity had achieved in 2 centuries of peaceful expansion across the galaxy. What had once been a barren rock orbiting a distant star was now home to 40,000 colonists who had transformed the lifeless world into a paradise of green forests, flowing rivers, and productive farmland. The settlement's architecture reflected humanity's commitment to harmony. Curved buildings that seemed to grow from the landscape itself, solar collectors that doubled as art installations, and community spaces designed to bring people together, rather than divide them. Elena walked through the marketplace where human merchants traded alongside representatives from a dozen alien species. The Veltari, with their crystalline skin that caught and reflected light in rainbow patterns, offered rare minerals in exchange for human-grown spices. Gentle Morian traders, their forearms gracefully handling delicate textiles, bartered with colonists who had learned to appreciate the intricate patterns of their woven goods. At the center of the market square stood a fountain carved from local stone, its water flowing in patterns that represented the peaceful coexistence of all species who called this sector of space home. The Diplomatic Achievement Ambassador Marcus Chen sat in his office reviewing the latest trade reports that painted a picture of unprecedented prosperity. Human colonies now stretched across 73 star systems, each one a testament to their species' ability to build rather than destroy. Unlike the ancient empires of Earth's past, humanity had expanded through invitation rather than conquest, establishing settlements only on uninhabited worlds and forming partnerships with existing civilizations based on mutual benefit. The success of their peaceful approach had surprised even humanity's most optimistic leaders. Where other species saw expansion as a zero-sum competition for resources, humans had demonstrated that cooperation could create wealth for everyone involved. Their agricultural expertise had ended famines on 6 different worlds. Their medical knowledge had saved entire civilizations from devastating plagues. Their engineering skills had built trade routes that connected distant cultures for the first time in galactic history. Marcus pulled up a holographic display showing the current diplomatic status of human space. Green indicators marked friendly relationships with 47 different species, while yellow dots showed neutral contacts that were slowly warming toward full partnership. Only a handful of red markers indicated species that remained suspicious of human intentions, and even those relationships showed signs of gradual improvement. The door chimed softly, and Dr. Sarah Kim entered carrying a datapad filled with xenobiology reports. Her work studying alien life forms had become the foundation for many of humanity's most successful diplomatic initiatives. Understanding how different species thought and communicated had allowed human negotiators to find common ground, even with civilizations that initially seemed completely incompatible. The cultural exchange program with the Nexari is exceeding all expectations, Sarah reported, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. Their young people are learning our agricultural techniques while our students are mastering their energy manipulation technologies. Both species are benefiting from the knowledge transfer. Marcus smiled as he reviewed the progress reports. The Nexari had initially been skeptical of human motives, having dealt with aggressive species in the past that used cultural exchange as a pretext for espionage or subversion. It had taken 3 years of patient diplomacy to convince them that humanity genuinely wanted to learn from and share with other civilizations without hidden agendas. The deceptive visitors. The first Krillian diplomatic vessel arrived at New Horizon on a Tuesday morning, its sleek design and advanced technology immediately drawing crowds of curious colonists. The ship was beautiful in an alien way, with flowing lines that suggested both elegance and power. Its hull seemed to shift color in the sunlight, creating patterns that mesmerized human observers who had never seen such sophisticated materials. Captain. Thexvar of the Krillian Empire emerged from the ship with a delegation of 12 representatives, their tall forms impressive in ornate robes that seemed to float around their bodies. The Krillians were humanoid but distinctly alien, with pale blue skin marked by intricate patterns that indicated their rank and achievements. Their eyes were larger than human eyes, a deep violet color that seemed to hold ancient wisdom and boundless curiosity. Elena greeted the delegation with the formal protocols that had become standard for first contact situations. The Krillians appeared fascinated by human customs, asking detailed questions about everything from their governmental structure to their child-rearing practices. Their leader, Thexvar, spoke in perfect English that suggested extensive study of human language and culture. "We have observed your species' remarkable expansion across this sector," Thexvar said during the welcome ceremony in New Horizons' main assembly hall. "Your methods intrigue us. Most civilizations achieve growth through conquest or intimidation, yet you have built an empire of friends rather than subjects." The gathered colonists applauded the diplomatic language, interpreting it as recognition of humanity's peaceful achievements. Elena felt proud as she explained their philosophy of cooperation over domination, mutual benefit over exploitation. The Krillians listened with apparent approval, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated their genuine interest in understanding human society. Over the following weeks, the Krillian delegation established a temporary embassy on New Horizon and began what they described as a comprehensive cultural study. Their scientists worked alongside human researchers, their philosophers engaged in long discussions with human ethicists, and their artists collaborated on creative projects that blended the aesthetic traditions of both species. The Hidden Studies Dr. Sarah Kim found herself working closely with Krillian xenobiologist Velthar, whose knowledge of alien physiology was impressively comprehensive. Their joint research projects produced fascinating insights into the biological diversity of galactic life. But Sarah began to notice that Velthar's questions often focused on specifically human characteristics, rather than the broader topics they were supposedly studying together. "Your species' pain tolerance is remarkably high compared to most biological forms we have encountered," Velthar observed during one of their research sessions. "Have you conducted studies on the psychological effects of physical trauma on human decision-making capabilities?" Sarah found the question oddly specific but answered honestly, explaining that human medical literature included extensive research on pain management and trauma response. She provided Velthar with access to their databases, assuming that the information would be useful for potential medical cooperation between their species. Similar conversations were happening throughout the colony, as Krillian specialists engaged with their human counterparts. Military historian Colonel James Park found himself discussing the theoretical tactics that ancient human armies had employed, while engineer Lisa Rodriguez explained the defensive capabilities of human settlements and the logistical requirements for maintaining colonies in hostile environments. The Krillians proved to be excellent students, absorbing information with remarkable speed and asking follow-up questions that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of human society. Their curiosity seemed boundless, and their apparent respect for human achievements made even cautious individuals feel comfortable sharing detailed knowledge about their civilization's capabilities and limitations. The growing unease. 3 months. Into the cultural exchange, Elena began to notice subtle patterns in Krillian behavior that triggered instincts she hadn't used in decades. The visitors were always polite and respectful, but their questions had an underlying focus that seemed more systematic than casual curiosity would explain. They wanted to know about human population distributions, industrial capacities, communication, networks, and resource allocation in ways that felt more like intelligence gathering than academic research. She brought her concerns to a private meeting with Ambassador Chen and Dr. Kim, sharing her observations in the secure conference room beneath the Colonial Administration building. The 3 humans sat around a table displaying holographic maps of human space, discussing their growing suspicions in voices barely above whispers. "I've been reviewing the topics they've shown interest in," Marcus said, manipulating the display to highlight various data points. Food production capacities, mineral extraction rates, transportation networks, communication delays between colonies. Individually, these are reasonable subjects for cultural exchange. Together, they form a comprehensive assessment of our civilization's strengths and vulnerabilities. Sarah nodded, her expression troubled. Valthar has been particularly interested in human psychological responses to stress and loss. Yesterday, he asked about how human communities react when their leadership is eliminated or when they face overwhelming military force. When I asked why he needed such information, he said it was for theoretical xenopsychology research. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground chamber's temperature. Her years of experience with first contact protocols had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct was now screaming warnings that she had been too polite to acknowledge. The Krillians were studying humanity, not as potential partners, but as potential prey, the false prosperity. Despite the growing concerns of colonial leadership, life on New Horizon continued with the peaceful rhythm that defined human civilization. The Krillian presence had actually boosted local morale, as colonists took pride in being selected for such an important cultural exchange. Trade relationships flourished as the visitors expressed interest in human agricultural products and manufacturing techniques. The economic benefits were real and immediate. Krillian technology helped improve crop yields and energy efficiency throughout the colony. Their advanced materials were traded for human goods at rates that seemed almost too generous. Several colonists privately remarked that the Krillians were either poor negotiators or incredibly generous, not realizing that their visitors had no intention of honoring long-term trade agreements. Children throughout the colony attended special presentations where Krillian educators shared stories about their empire's history and achievements. The aliens spoke of a vast civilization spanning hundreds of worlds, united under wise leadership that had brought peace and prosperity to countless species. They described their expansion as a benevolent process where superior technology and organization lifted primitive cultures to new heights of achievement. Young Tommy Martinez, age 12, raised his hand during one such presentation to ask about the species that hadn't wanted to join the Krillian Empire. The educator, a female named Sithara, smiled with what humans interpreted as maternal warmth before explaining that such situations were extremely rare. Most civilizations, she said, were grateful for the opportunity to become part of something greater than themselves. The final warnings, Alina's investigation into Krillian activities on New Horizon revealed patterns that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. The visitors had systematically mapped every critical facility in the colony, from power generation stations to communication arrays to the spaceport that connected them to the rest of human space. Their cultural exchanges had provided them with detailed knowledge of human organizational structures, decision-making processes, and the psychological factors that motivated human behavior. More troubling were the subtle signs that similar intelligence gathering was happening throughout human space. Encrypted communications from other colonies reported Krillian delegations asking remarkably similar questions and showing interest in identical strategic topics. The pattern suggested a coordinated effort to assess human civilization's capacity. For resistance, Elena sent a priority message to Earth through the most secure channels available, but the response from the Terran government was cautiously optimistic rather than alarmed. Politicians and diplomats who had spent decades building peaceful relationships with alien species were reluctant to assume hostile intentions without concrete evidence of aggressive action. The Krillian delegation was scheduled to depart New Horizon in 2 weeks, concluding their cultural exchange with a grand ceremony celebrating the friendship between their species. Elena watched the preparations with growing dread, knowing that she was witnessing the end of something precious and irreplaceable. On their final night on New Horizon, the Krillians hosted a farewell banquet that brought together humans and aliens in celebration of their shared discoveries. Captain Thexavar raised a toast to the peaceful future that awaited both civilizations, his words warm with apparent sincerity, and his eyes bright with what humans mistook for friendship. As Elena joined the applause that followed the captain's speech, she noticed Thexavar's gaze sweep across the assembled crowd with the calculating assessment of a predator, evaluating its prey. In that moment, she realized that humanity's greatest strength, their instinctive trust in the goodness of others, was about to become their greatest vulnerability. The awakening thunder. The morning of betrayal, Admiral David Torres was reviewing routine patrol reports in his office aboard the TFS Endeavour when the first distress signals began flooding the communication networks. At 0347 Standard Galactic Time, 17 human colonies across 4 sectors simultaneously broadcast emergency transmissions before their signals were abruptly cut off. The pattern was too coordinated to be coincidental and too widespread to be anything but a full-scale military assault. The initial reports painted a picture of devastation that human commanders had never imagined they would face. New Horizon Colony, where the Krillian cultural exchange had been celebrated just days earlier, was among the first targets hit. The attackers had emerged from hyperspace with perfect knowledge of the settlement's defenses, communication systems, and population centers. Within 30 minutes, all resistance had been eliminated, and the colony's 40,000 inhabitants were either dead or captured. Similar reports cascaded in from across human space. Industrial colonies that produced critical resources for the galactic economy were seized intact, their infrastructure undamaged, but their human workers herded into detention facilities. Agricultural worlds that fed multiple star systems were occupied by forces that seemed to know exactly where to strike for maximum impact with minimum resistance. Captain Elena Vasquez was among the few survivors who managed to escape New Horizon during the initial assault. Her emergency broadcast, transmitted from a damaged shuttle fleeing the system, provided the first eyewitness account of the attack. Her voice was steady despite the trauma she had endured, delivering information that would reshape humanity's understanding of their place in the galaxy. "This is Captain Vasquez of New Horizon Colony," her message began, static occasionally interrupting the transmission. "We are under attack by massive Krillian battle fleets. They knew exactly where to hit us. Power stations, communication arrays, defensive installations. Everything they learned during their cultural exchange they used against us. Repeat, the Krillians have turned our trust into a weapon." The calculated cruelty, the Krillian assault strategy revealed a level of psychological sophistication that shocked human military analysts. Rather than simply destroying human settlements, the attackers seemed determined to break the spirit of resistance through carefully calculated acts of terror. Civilian populations were divided into categories based on their perceived usefulness, with those deemed expendable, executed publicly to intimidate survivors. Commander Sarah Chen, Elena's sister and a communications specialist aboard the TFS Horizon, monitored the intercepted Krillian transmissions that provided insight into their strategic thinking. The aliens were broadcasting their actions across captured human communication networks, ensuring that news of atrocities would spread throughout human space to create panic and despair. "They're not just conquering us," Sarah reported during an emergency briefing aboard the Horizon. "They're trying to convince us that resistance is futile by demonstrating the cost of defying them. Every public execution, every destroyed building, every separated family is designed to make other colonies surrender without fighting." The psychological warfare extended to the treatment of prisoners, who were forced to record messages urging their friends and families to accept Krillian rule. The aliens had studied human emotional bonds extensively during their cultural exchanges, and they exploited that knowledge with clinical precision. Children were separated from parents, spouses were threatened with each other's deaths, and community leaders were tortured in full view of their followers. Governor Rebecca Nash of the Kepler Prime Colony received one such recording featuring her daughter Amy, who had been visiting New Horizon during the attack. The 12-year-old girl appeared on screen with tears streaming down her face, begging her mother to surrender the colony to save the lives of other captured children. The message was delivered with a Krillian ultimatum: submit within 24 hours or watch the systematic execution of every human child in their custody. The Desperate Council. President Michael Harrison convened an emergency session of the Terran Council in the deep bunkers beneath Geneva, where humanity's leadership gathered to confront a crisis that none of them had imagined possible. The assembled representatives came from every major human colony and organization, their faces reflecting the shock and horror of learning that their peaceful civilization was under assault by creatures they had trusted as friends. The intelligence reports painted a grim picture, of human military capabilities compared to the Krillian war machine. Humanity's fleet consisted primarily of exploration vessels and light patrol craft designed for scientific research and peaceful contact with alien civilizations. Their weapons were minimal, their armor was light, and their tactics were focused on defense and rescue operations rather than aggressive combat. General Patricia Williams, the highest-ranking military officer in human space, stood before the council with charts and displays that illustrated the scope of their disadvantage. The Krillian Empire fielded battle fleets that numbered in the thousands, with individual ships larger and more heavily armed than anything in human service. Their ground forces were equipped with weapons and armor that could overwhelm human defensive positions through sheer technological superiority. "We are facing an enemy that has been preparing for this war while we were building gardens," General Williams reported, her voice carrying the weight of professional assessment rather than emotional despair. "Our current military assets are insufficient to defend even our core systems against the forces they have deployed. At current engagement rates, organized human resistance will collapse within 6 months." The council chamber fell silent as representatives absorbed the reality of their situation. 2 centuries of peaceful expansion and diplomatic success had left humanity unprepared for total war against an opponent that possessed both technological superiority and detailed knowledge of human weaknesses. Dr. Robert Kim, the government's chief science advisor, activated a secure holographic display that showed classified research projects hidden deep within the bureaucracy of various human institutions. His presentation would reveal capabilities that most council members had never known existed, secrets that had been deliberately buried to prevent their misuse. The Hidden Arsenal Project Phoenix was established 150 years ago. As a failsafe against exactly this scenario, Dr. Kim explained as the holographic display showed research facilities scattered across human space. "When our species chose the path of peace, certain individuals insisted that we maintain the capability to defend ourselves if that choice was ever challenged by hostile forces. The project had operated in absolute secrecy, funded through classified budgets and staffed by researchers who believed that humanity's survival might someday depend on weapons they hoped would never be built. The facilities were hidden on remote worlds and disguised as legitimate research stations, their true purpose known only to a handful of cleared personnel and a succession of presidents who had maintained the program despite their personal commitment to peaceful expansion. The weapon systems developed under Project Phoenix represented a revolution in military technology that combined human ingenuity with principles that other species had never explored. Quantum disruption cannons that could tear apart matter at the subatomic level, artificial intelligence systems that could process tactical information faster than any biological mind, defensive shields that could absorb energy attacks and redirect that power to offensive systems. Admiral Torres studied the technical specifications with growing amazement and horror. The weapons described in these classified files could devastate entire fleets and reduce populated worlds to lifeless rocks. They represented capabilities that would make humanity the most dangerous military force in known galactic history, but using them would transform human civilization into something completely different from what it had been for 2 centuries. "How long would it take to deploy these systems?" President Harrison asked, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the decision he was contemplating. Dr. Kim consulted his reports before answering. "The production facilities can be activated within 72 hours. First-generation weapons could be ready for deployment within 30 days. Full-scale manufacturing would give us fleet superiority over any known civilization within 6 months." The chamber filled with hushed conversations as council members discussed the implications among themselves. They were being asked to abandon the philosophical foundations of their civilization in order to save it from destruction. The choice would define not just their response to the current crisis, but the future path of human development across the galaxy. The transformation begins. President Harrison's authorization of Project Phoenix triggered the largest industrial mobilization in human history. Across 73 star systems, manufacturing facilities that had produced consumer goods and scientific instruments were rapidly converted to weapons production. Research stations that had studied alien cultures and cosmic phenomena redirected their efforts toward developing new ways to destroy enemy forces. The transformation affected every aspect of human society, as colonists who had spent their lives growing food and building homes learned to operate weapons factories and military training facilities. Universities that had focused on philosophy and artistic expression began teaching courses in tactical analysis and strategic planning. Children who had grown up hearing stories about peaceful exploration suddenly found themselves preparing for a war that would determine whether their species survived. Captain Elena Vasquez, one of the few survivors from New Horizon, volunteered for the first wave of military vessels equipped with Phoenix technology. The TFS Retribution bore little resemblance to the exploration ships that had carried human diplomats across the galaxy. It was a weapon designed for the sole purpose of destroying enemies, its sleek hull bristling with energy cannons, and its advanced AI systems calculating optimal attack patterns against Krillian targets. Elena stood on the bridge of her new command, watching the final system checks as her crew prepared for humanity's first major counterattack. These men and women had been teachers, farmers, and researchers just months earlier. Now they operated weapon systems that could annihilate entire enemy fleets with devastating efficiency. The target for their mission was the Krillian garrison fleet, holding the captured colony of Haven's Point, where intelligence reports indicated that several thousand human prisoners were being held under brutal conditions. The rescue operation would serve both strategic and psychological purposes, demonstrating that humanity had not been defeated and that their enemies would pay a terrible price for their aggression. The counterstrike. The Battle of Haven's Point lasted exactly 17 minutes and redefined galactic understanding of human military capability. Elena's task force of 12 Phoenix-equipped vessels emerged from hyperspace to find 37 Krillian warships in defensive positions around the occupied colony. The enemy commanders, confident in their technological superiority, moved to engage what they assumed would be another easy victory against primitive human forces. The first salvo from the TFS Retribution vaporized 3 Krillian cruisers in less than 10 seconds, their advanced shields offering no protection against quantum disruption weapons that attack the fundamental structure of matter itself. The enemy fleet attempted to return fire, but their energy attacks were absorbed by human defensive systems and redirected back at their own ships with amplified destructive power. Krillian tactical computers, programmed with detailed analyses of human military capabilities based on their intelligence gathering, provided no guidance for dealing with weapons that surpassed their own technology by several generations. Their commanders found themselves facing an enemy that fought with precision and ruthlessness that contradicted everything they had learned about human nature during their cultural exchanges. Captain Thexvar, the Krillian officer who had led the diplomatic mission to New Horizon, commanded the garrison fleet from his flagship positioned directly above the captured colony. His final transmission was intercepted by human intelligence services and broadcast throughout both human and alien space. Impossible. These are not the same creatures we studied. What have we awakened? The question would haunt the Krillian Empire as news of their defeat spread across the galaxy. Species that had cowered before their military might began to reconsider their relationships with both the Empire and humanity. The psychological impact of a single devastating defeat shattered the reputation for invincibility that the Krillians had cultivated through centuries of conquest. The new reality Elena walked through, the liberated colony of Haven's Point, surveying the damage inflicted by 3 months of Krillian occupation. The settlement that had once been home to 15,000 peaceful colonists was scarred by destruction and marked by the graves of those who had died resisting their captors. The survivors who emerged from detention facilities were changed by their experiences, their eyes holding a hardness that had been absent from human faces for 2 centuries. The rescued colonists gathered in the main square where a makeshift memorial honored those who had died during the occupation. Elena spoke to the crowd about the price of peace and the necessity of strength, her words carrying authority earned through combat rather than diplomatic training. The audience listened with the attention of people who had learned that survival sometimes required choices that their peaceful ancestors would have found abhorrent. Similar scenes were repeated across human space as Phoenix-equipped fleets liberated colony after colony from Krillian occupation. Each victory came at a cost measured not just in resources and lives, but in the transformation of human civilization itself. The species that had prided itself on solving problems through negotiation and compromise was learning to think in terms of total war and absolute victory. Ambassador Marcus Chen, who had spent decades building relationships with alien civilizations, found himself reassigned to psychological warfare operations designed to break enemy morale and encourage defections among Kryllian subject species. His expertise in alien cultures was now applied to finding ways to turn the Empire's conquered populations against their masters. The change in humanity's galactic reputation was swift and dramatic. Species that had viewed humans as useful mediators and trading partners began to regard them with the mixture of respect and fear, typically reserved for major military powers. Diplomatic relationships that had been based on mutual benefit were transformed into careful negotiations between civilizations that understood the potential consequences of conflict. President Harrison addressed the human people from the same office where he had authorized Project Phoenix 6 months earlier. His speech was broadcast throughout human space and transmitted to alien governments as both explanation and warning. The words he chose would define humanity's new relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. "We did not choose this war, but we will finish it," Harrison declared, his voice carrying the weight of decisions that had transformed his species. "For 2 centuries, we extended friendship to all who would accept it. That offer remains open to those who approach us in peace. But to those who mistake our preference for peace as weakness, who prey upon the innocent, who believe that might makes right, we say this: you have awakened something in humanity that we had hoped would never be needed again. We are no longer the species you thought you knew." The message resonated across the galaxy as civilizations adjusted their understanding of human nature and capability. The species that had built an empire of friendship was proving equally capable of building an empire of ash. The Kryllians had indeed awakened something in humanity, but it was not the cowering submission they had expected. They had awakened the ancient fury of a species that remembered how to fight and had never forgotten how to win.